Hello everyone, this is Nikita and today I have come up with a video on exception handling in service REST. So in the last video we have understood how do we configure a service REST, and we have gone through the get method where the client would be requesting for some details around the book. Okay, so they would be sending a ID or a book ID, and then accordingly we will check in our application what is the corresponding book details for that ID, and we would pass that as a response to the client. So this was the use case which we have discussed in the last video, but that was the plain request response that we have configured without any exception handling. So in the real world, it doesn't happen like that. We also have to configure exception handling. It is a very important part of any API creation and all this stuff, right? So in the real world scenario, exception or error do happen, and you need to find a way so that your application doesn't get messed up when there is any exception. You properly handle it. You properly pass the response code and the message to the client so that they understood or they understand what has happened, and how can they check and send the request again. So this is how I thought that it is very important to make a video on that. So on that note, let's first understand what we would be covering in this particular video. So basically three response code that normally deals with any service API, service REST APIs, that we will also discover here and handle it in our application. So the first is 2xx. So 200, you have already known that it's always a success code. So we would discuss how do we pass the success code to the client when everything went well. Next is the bad request of 4xx. So it can be 400, 404, all the stuff, right? So these are basically client error, when it can be when the payload has some error, syntactical error, or the ID which they're requesting for doesn't exist, so the resource doesn't exist. These kind of thing can happen. Or there can be 5xx errors or the server error, when we, the server, are not able to handle the request properly. It may be because my DB is not working, or it may be because something bad happened to my server, or I'm not able to serve the client as it expected. So these three exception scenarios we would handle in our application. Okay, so let's jump into our application directly. This is my application, and this is the service REST that we configured in our last video. So we would start from here. Okay, so it is the basically the book details API, where the client would send me an ID or the book ID, and we would pass as the response, or the book details as a response. Okay, so we had configured a get method and a get service activity, wherein we are actually done our basically the coding which we require for this particular response. So this is the same one which we have configured in the last video. We would improvise from here. So in the first step, what we did is, let's go step by step, and we created the page, right? And then what we did is we took the ID or the book ID from the request page and set it in some temp page, okay, in book page. And then that ID is used to fetch the value from the database. Okay, so this is basically the class, and the class is mapped to a table. Okay, database table. So we are basically fetching it from our database table, and whatever the ID we have got from the request. So this is like when we do obj browse, when we fetch the data, okay, that data, whatever we got as the response, we would pass it, or we would copy it in the response page and send it to the client. So this was as easy as we did. Okay, there were no other improvisation. It was an easy use case. But now we have to handle different scenarios. First of all, the good scenario, right? We need to pass the response code or the response message that for each for each scenario. First of all, let's focus on the good scenario, the happy path scenario, where they sent me the ID and I passed them as a response. So it went well. So this is basically 200 response code we can pass to the service. So let's do that. Here we are basically doing response book list. Okay, so let's first check whether this is working well or not. Let me go to my book data type, see what ID I have to fetch. Okay. Okay, so B123 something which I can try to get it. So let's test this API again, run it. So it's a get method, ID is 123, execute. Well done. So we have ID, author name, book name, number of pages, everything is good. Okay. HTTP status code is also 200. Okay. But let's also handle it in our application or handle it in my method. So let's do that. Let's also set the response code. I just created one property called response code. Okay, it's under my response class. You can see this response code. So let me set it as 200. Okay. I can also set a message that I was able to success or something like that. Let me do that. So there must be some property already there. Let me try to see. Yes, I can use message. Okay. Success. There's nothing we can tell much here. So now when I test this, I need to see that the client is able to see the response code or not. So let's test this. Run it again, 1, 2, 3. Now execute. Okay. So I see class, I see author name, I see book ID. Okay. So you might be wondering why I don't see the response code and all. I'll tell you what has happened. Let me go to my service REST method, get response. So you can see here, I am directly mapping to the book list. Basically, I should map it directly to response. Now it should work. Let's try this. Okay, yeah. So now you can see I get the response code. I don't know if you're able to view this. Let me zoom it a bit. Okay, so here it is response code as 200. Okay, message as success. This is what I set it just now. So this is the happy case scenario. Okay, where okay, so where we got the ID related details from our database and then sent it to the client. Okay, so that was a 200 scenario. Let's go for some other scenario. What is the next scenario we should cover? We should cover the bad request or the client error. Okay, so what can be the client error? Maybe the ID that they have requested, that's not present in my database. It can be there, right? So I see in my data type I have B123, but do I have anything else? No, right? So if I try to find any details for some ID which is not existent, what response I will get? Let's see. Let's first run it. Okay, giving some bad request or bad input. Let's run this. Let me give some 5, 5, 6. Okay, so it's not existent. Let's execute. Wow. That's strange because it's giving me B123. Something wrong has happened. Let's test this, why this has happened here. Okay, get book details. Okay, book page.book ID is equal. Okay. Okay. Am I removing this book page, book list? Okay, so let's test this out. Let's trace this. Okay, so let me simulate this here. Execute. Let's see what has happened. How did it return result? That's a question. So as you can see, book ID as book ID, but there is no where clause here, right, in this query. So somehow it's not taking the filter condition. Let me see what has happened. Book page. So the best way to check why this has happened, because I need to see what value that book page has, right? So I need to check that. Let's add that page. Basically, you need to add the page whenever this kind of thing happens and you're not able to see the page related details in the tracer. You need to go to settings. Let's pause this. Go to settings. Here you will see page name. See, I have added many pages for my testing. So page name is book page and add it. Okay. Let's click on OK. Now let's test this out again. Trace, execute. Okay. So let's see in OBJ browse. I would see a page called book page. So it doesn't have any value. Okay. So I'm passing null. Is it? Okay, so what has happened is basically this set is not working. Somehow the book ID is not getting passed. So let me see if in my request everything went well. Dot request dot book ID. It's my query string parameter. It looks okay. So the issue was here we have not set the row key. So PZINS key we have to set to identify basically which row we are picking up. So PZINS key is a must here. So let's now test this again. Okay. Okay. So run it, give something and execute. So now you see what book list is empty. Message is showing success and response code is 200. This is what we have to fix. Basically, it's empty. That means the ID which they have sent doesn't comply with the details what we have for different books. So that's basically a 400 kind of response. So let's make that in our code also. So now what we have to do is when we fetch the value from our database, we try to find out any book related to this book ID. And when we don't get any thing as a result, okay, then we set the response as 400. So let's do that here. So here we browse it book list. Okay, so the result should be in PX results inside book list. So now we have to check whether my list has some value or not. So let's go to the when condition, enable it. Basically, you need to set this length of page list. You would find it here. Go to this icon and browse for length of page list. Okay. So you would see, check the signature. It basically returns in length of page list. Okay, and you have to pass the page list as a parameter. So that's what I did. Length of page list, my page list is booklist.px result. So I need to check it is greater than 1 or not. If it is less than 1, that means it doesn't have any value. Okay, so that's like a bad request. So let's do that, greater than 1. If it is true, continue whens. If it is false, jump to later step. We would give some label not found, something like that, and submit. So when it is not found, it should jump to some other step. So let me create a step below this. So it would be not found. So when it is not found, what we do? We set the response like that. So my response would be, and set the message or comment here. No ID found. Something like that. Okay. No, no details found related to the given ID. Okay. right? Okay. So now what do we set? First of all, let us set the response code. So my response code would be 400. Let's put it as 400. Now response message, that's very important. We need to pass a message to them to be intuitive. So what message I can have? I can either give a generic response like bad request, okay, or a client error. But we can also be specific. So it can also be that no details found for this book ID. Okay, so the client will know that what is the reason for me to get this 400 error. Okay, so this is one thing which we can do. So after you set this response code, you need to just jump to the last message. So if you anyways go, right, after this is done, you would go to the page remove. But when you are here and everything went well, you set this 200 and success, you do not want to go to the next step, you just want to exit from here and go to if step status fail, step status good, if true, where you want to go, remove. Either you can go to remove step, or you can be a little, if you think about it, right, when you are in this step, you would always want to exit this activity. Okay, so you can do that, but since you have to remove page also, you need to go to the remove page. Even if you jump to later step, even if it is bad or good, you have to move to remove step. So let's go and name this as remove. So this is, so let's test this out. Okay, let me try to run this and give some ID. Okay, execute this. What do you get? I get a response code as 400 and I get a message. No details found for this book ID. This looks perfect. Yeah, this kind of message client wants. So we are done with 400 bad requests. Okay. Now the server error. What can be the server error? Okay. So as I told you, server error can be something like I couldn't serve the client because of some issue with my application. It can be anything. So let's take one scenario. Maybe when I'm trying to get the data from my database, at that time some database issue happened and I was not able to retrieve anything. Okay, so that can be one scenario. So to handle that, what we can do is when we try to obj browse, then we can have some issue, right? So when this happens, whenever we have step status fail for obj browse step, we can move it to error. It's something error happened. If false, continuance, no problem. And also you can move it in on exception, jump to letter step, error. Okay, so now you have to create a step maybe right after this. Okay, this can be error, and what has happened? Basically, you were not able to serve. Okay, I can give a response code. Let's give it as 500. Okay, what can be the message? Message can be, sorry, I was not able to serve you, right? Server error. You can be generic also. You never know what has happened. So after this is done, you need to go to page remove anyways, right? But if you are in this step now, in the not found step, you can't go to the error step. So you need to jump from here and go to the page remove step. You can be always jump to later step. Okay, RMB. Anyways, whenever you are here, you need to go to the RMB step. I think here also I have done a mistake. You anyways, when you are in response, when everything went well, you need to always do a page remove, right? Okay. Now it looks good. Okay, so let's test out the last scenario where we are basically facing some issue doing OBJ browse. Now, to recreate this scenario, how would you do that? Mm, mm, mm. What we can do is we can do something on the database so that it's not able to retrieve. Okay, but it's little difficult to do that. So let me try to. I can give some bad class. Okay, does it work? Let's see. Okay. Okay, so if you give this, no, I will not be able to get the book ID, right? So let it be, let book list be book list. The class was, okay. Whenever something wrong happen in this step, in OBJ browse, then basically you will go to the error step. Error step is this step where you set the response code as 500 and message as server error, right? I have some other idea as well if that works. Suppose in this particular class, it has some database table. Okay. So test connectivity would work. Now if I try to remove this and save it, it will say that it needs to have some value entered. Okay. Okay, I just saved some. Okay. I know it is wrong, but let's see if that works in my scenario. Okay. So let's test this out. Run it. Let's give me some valid value here and execute. Oh wow, we got our result. So that's what we were looking for. Response code as 500, message as server error. So something bad happened during OBJ browse. Since we gave the wrong table name, it was not able to fetch the value. So this was my last scenario. It was a server error. It was my error. It was server error that it was not able to serve the client. So I think that was all about exception handling, and this actually applies to get and post as well. When I come up with a video on post service activity, then also we will use these exception handling. But for now, for get method, I think this is basic things that you need to know to have a full-fledged service working with good exception handling. So even in interview, right? So even in interview, these are very important. They will ask you, how would you do exception handling? And you need to tell them, what are the scenarios and how would you do this jump if steps, and basically how would you set the message, all those things. Okay. So I hope this video was useful to you. I would come again with the next video on service activity very soon. Till then, keep watching, keep learning, and see you again in next video. Bye bye.